work is perfect. He's the author and the finisher of our faith. It's of God. We are in Christ, Christ in you, the hope of glory. Christ in you, the mystery. You're in him in you, the mystery. Deeper into His law of liberty. In the mirror you will see His image reflected in you. You are born from above in the light of His love. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Christ in you, the mystery. You're in him in you, the mystery.
Guard your heart
above all else.
It holds the secret
of your life.
You're not the
Product
of
your own works, of the Father's love. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Christ in you, the mystery. You're in him in you. It's a mystery. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Christ in you, the mystery. You're in him in you. It's a mystery. Mystery revealed. Look deeper into His law of liberty. In the mirror you will see His image reflected in you. You are born from above, light of His love. I see you, the hope of glory. I see you, the mystery. You're in him in you, mystery. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Christ in you, the mystery. You're in him in you. It's a mystery. Mystery revealed. Mystery.
Oh, we thank you, Abba.
Yeah.
words of the song are, how can we measure the expanses of you? We try to confine you in our small point of view. But you are not tame. God, you are wild and free, sweeping me off my feet, the wonder that is you. And there's such a beauty in realizing that, you know, whatever we know, whatever our thoughts are about God, that is not God. It's our thoughts about God. God is always way larger than our one point of view.
Yeah.
And so we will never
Yeah.
get to a point where we go, oh, you know, even one day seeing face to face going, oh, God, I thought you were bigger. I thought you were better than this. You know, there's always going to be the surprise that God far outweighs our single point of view. And it's so good to bear that in mind where we hear new ideas or we're stretched a bit to realize, hey, whatever I understand now is a small piece. It's a fragment of such a beautiful whole. And then the chorus goes, you're within, but not confined. You're without, but not excluded. You're above, but not aloof. Below, but not cast down. You simply are all in all. How can we measure the expanses of you? We try to confine you with our small point of view. But you are not tame. God, you are wild and free, sweeping me off my feet into the wonder that is you. And hope soars in the faithfulness of love. Faith breathes in the spaciousness of your embrace. You're within, but not confined, without, but not excluded. Above, but not aloof, below, but not cast down. Holy God, you are all in all. And now I cry out, you are so beautiful. But all of my words fall short, for you are more than it all. Falling over the edge of my firm conclusions, I'm caught up on the wings of your love's assurance. For hope soars in the faithfulness of love. Spaciousness of your embrace. You're within, but not confined, without, but not excluded. Above, but not aloof, below, but not cast down. Holy God, you are all in all. Your breath is breathing in me. It's your breath through which I see. Your love is beating in me. Your joy so wild and free. Holy Thanks as well.
Thank you, madam. Yeah. Wonderful. Can I just go? And stay in that beautiful mode of music and poetry. So I'm so grateful that words are not supposed to just describe reality, but it's meant to enrich our reality. It's meant to draw us beyond what is into what could be. And so I've been given the permission to be as free and spontaneous as I wanted today, and we've been looking forward to this opportunity to just reconnect with old friends, see new friends, and kind of share a bit of the journey that we've been on that has transformed both our thinking and our experience. So I think one of the most frustrating places you could be is when your ideas and your experience are separated, where you're dealing with concepts, but it has no relevance to life. There's no relevance to your experience. I'm really not at all interested in that kind of theology anymore. It's such a waste of time. If something doesn't enrich experience, it has no value. Yeah. And so I want you to keep that in mind, even with what we shared today, that yes, you might be stretched in your logic, in your thinking, trying to work out where does this fit in with what I believe, but the aim is to give you more than just a new idea. The aim is to give you a new awareness, a new experience of the possibilities of meaning that surrounds you. Now, we all have a story that brought us here today. A story that you've been involved in all through your whole life, because meaning is both created and discovered. It's discovered because none of us arrived on this earth as a blank canvas without any influences. Each one of us were born into a family, a community, a culture, a nation, a world at a specific point in history where the stories and the narratives that surround us has influenced you whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not. You've been shaped and influenced because you land in this world, you arrive here, and for the first few years of your life, you try and figure out what the hell is going on. What is this? Where am I? Who am I? And so even the psychologist who looks at child development kind of describes it as a continual process of reorientating ourselves around new realities. So we start off very imaginative, very anything's possible. And then later on in our childhood, we start searching for certainty because we kind of aspire to be as confident as those who are bigger and older than us. And so we kind of get this idea very early on that if I can be certain, I can be secure. And so we start pursuing certainty. Sure. So at a young age, we are very open to experiencing teaching us. Put your hand on the plate, oh, that's hot, I've got to learn, don't do that again. And we're open to new experiences. But then at some point in life, we get to a place where we think we've got most of it sorted out now. We're kind of at that place where we think we know how things work, and we've now formed a structure of interpretation And every new experience, we don't allow experience to teach us anymore. We now teach experiences what they mean. In other words, we have a new experience, and even the creativity and the newness in that experience, we conform it and we press it down to fit our mold, to fit into our story, to make sense. And so it's natural that at a point in our lives where we search for identity, we get to a stage where we get a little bit more rigid. We get a little bit more certain. And we get a little bit less open to new possibilities.
Sure.
And you know, the one thing that keeps you from experiencing God in a new way is the things that you already know about God. The thing that keeps you from experiencing yourself in a new way is the things that you're already convinced and persuaded of concerning yourself. To open ourselves up to a new experience of God, a new experience of ourselves, is not simply an accumulative process where I just want to add more. But that's what we would like it to be. We don't like to let go of what we already have. We want it to just be an addition. You know, like the Jewish nation who expected their Messiah, and then Jesus appears, and what they hope he would do is show the world how right they've been and how wrong they've been. They hope that revelation would be an affirmation. In other words, God comes and he says, you've always been right. I'm just going to give you a deeper understanding of how right you've been. But as Neil told us earlier, some of the most profound revelations are those encounters in which you realize the very foundation of who I think I am, who I think God is, that whole foundation is crumbling in the light of this new experience. So here we are, most of us are from a Christian background, and most of us have got a bit of a conflicted relationship with that story, and that history. There's some things about it that we're grateful for, and there's some things about that history that is endlessly frustrating. Am I speaking to the right people?
Amen.
Even if you're not even a Christian, this is a common human experience, that you are in a continual place of trying to harmonize the contrasts that you are. That the very things that you love the most also hurts the most. The very things that is most valuable to you is also the things that can make you lose hope. Yeah. So that's the kind of conflict we're all in. And we have a beautiful example in the person of Jesus, because if you think of Jesus, he also had a history. He had a story. He's born into a certain religion, into a certain nation at a certain time. His culture and his religion is basically one. It's impressed on him from an early age. And he makes a very interesting statement at one stage. He says, if you want to be part of this kingdom, a steward in this new kingdom, you're going to have to bring out of your house things that are both old and new. And I think part of what he maybe meant about that is but there's something about the house, the environment, the culture, the religion he grew up in. There's some of those things that were old, but were still treasures, that he still valued. But there's some of the new things he discovered that was just incompatible with where he came from. It just didn't fit in there anymore. So Jesus, I think, honestly, sincerely tried to renew the religion and the faith he was in, but he ended up blowing it up. Even his disciples afterwards, I don't think their idea was ever, let's start a new religion. Their idea was always, let's renew the religion we're in. But ultimately, it was so radically different that something new emerged. And yes, we can still trace our roots and find beauty in the history, the whole Jewish history of where Christianity came from. But I think we're in a point of history again where if we are followers of Jesus, we should not simply fit into the religion we were born into. You could be just a follower of Christianity and just fit into what is popular and good and not stand out or whatever. But if you're a follower of Jesus, you're going to have the boldness to say, there's things from my story and my past that I value. But there are other stuff that has become old, stale, irrelevant. There's a language that no longer connects to our world. There's a Christianese terminology that doesn't make sense to anyone else but the insiders. And how do we move out of that place of irrelevance?
Yes.
But it's not just irrelevant to the world, but very often irrelevant to your own experience of God. And how do we move into a place of, again, being open to a God that is bigger than any definition, any religion, any movement that's ever tried to capture him? How do we do that? Part of it, and so kind of that's the impromptu introduction. What I actually wanted to speak about today is a few of those ideas over the past few years that we've seen become more and more irrelevant. And yes, it might still be precious to some of you. So I'm going to share my experience. I'm not here to tell you this should be your beliefs or your experience, but I just want to be as honest as possible and tell you these things just doesn't work for me. It might still work for you, fine. You know. Do I have the liberty to just be that free? Right. And I hope that somewhere in there's going to be some resonance. Maybe out of the 2 or 3 points I make, you find one point that helps you move forward and enrich your own experience. So one thing in us traveling to churches and communities and groups all over the world that we've realized has become a major obstacle for people experiencing faith, and why people are leaving the church in their millions. And it's not just a temporary phase. We meet with these groups. They are never going to be part of what they came out of again. So why is that happening? What's one of the biggest things that I think is an obstacle to experiencing God in a new and a living way is what I would call dogmatic certainty. Dogmatic certainty. It's things that are beyond discussion. Things that I'm so certain of, I don't even want to dig deep or have a conversation about it. These are off limits. These are foundational truths, and we declare it with great fervor. And for many young people who go from church to college to university, they're exposed to new ideas. They're exposed to the fact that, wow, it looks like our world is really very old. It looks like there's a consensus between all the scientists and people that animals and plants and humans evolve. Now, they're exposed to these ideas, and there are very few places where they can go to find a cohesion or a conversation between the dogmatic faith that they came from and the new world that they are becoming part of. So for many, that just means it's a choice. You either move on into this world that is and leave behind those childish beliefs, or you get more dogmatic about your beliefs and research all the reasons why all the scientists are wrong. That seems to be the choice for me. So a few groups have been open enough to realize that God is really not that obsessed with you being certain. He doesn't really care about that as much as you. That obsession with certainty and security comes out of your own insecurity, not out of God's insecurity. God's not offended at you questioning and exploring. He's actually, have you ever seen your toddler kid to the beach and they're excited about the new sand and the water? I mean, God experiences your exploration the way you experience your child's exploration. He loves it. He's not saying, oh, don't read that book, you're going to drown. No, he says, no, I'm right here. You can wade into the water. In fact, let me throw you a bit and just help you out and expand you and confuse you. God's not offended that you're being confused. You see, when we begin in that idea that certainty equals security, there's a certain amount of truth in that. But ultimately, you will find out that there's no place that is more secure than a prison. And if you only live within your certainties, you're going to quickly discover that you live within a prison of what you're allowed to think, what you're allowed to consider, what you're allowed to explore, what you're allowed to do. Now, one of the best ways to overcome certainty is to introduce some divine doubt. I know many of you haven't heard about divine doubt. There's, please take everything I say within a context. Hear the spirit of it. There are some doubts that's not good. I doubt I'm good enough. I doubt I'm this. There's some doubts that we know. Don't bother with those doubts. But those kind of doubts that says, maybe there's more than my certainty. See, when I was little, my church taught me that come to Jesus, he's going to answer all your questions. But the more I've come to know him, the more I've learned that he's not interested in answering all my questions. He's interested in questioning all my answers. And the longer I stay with him, the more my answers get questioned. Divine doubt is for me a divine invitation to explore beyond the prison walls. This is where doubt and faith becomes two sides of the same coin. Doubt tears down the walls of your certainty so that faith can reach beyond it to possibilities you have not yet entertained. See, the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty.
Yeah, come on, say that again.
And you can't have faith without doubt. So one of the things that we've noticed that people are running from is what I would call a false faith, because it's just dogmatic certainty. It's here's our statements of what we believe. Even the people who kind of look at the progression of ideas within the New Testament, they would say faith in the very early stages of the Christian development and thought was very dynamic. It didn't have to do with the things you believe. It had to do with a whole attitude towards life, a way in which you live, this new relationship that opened up. Only later did faith come to be equated to certain statements that are static. So that's the first thing. Dogmatic certainty no longer works for me. There's many things I can be certain of, there's many things I can be assured of. Maybe I like the word assurance because for me, in a sense, certainty is something you've got to work up yourself. You've got to convince yourself. It's like a circular affirmation. I am certain. I am more than an overcomer in Christ. Get all your quotes. Make yourself, convince yourself that this is me. That is certainty. But assurance is something that comes from elsewhere. Assurance is something that you don't just work up yourself. I love Galatians 2:20 where Paul says, I no longer live, but Christ lives in me, and the life that I now live, I live by the faith of. It wasn't a faith that he had to just work and convince himself of, but a relationship that convinced him. So, with that, maybe I'll take it further, and I want to introduce two ideas that kind of link. You'll see how it links to this. It's the idea of idols and idols. Now, you would know that in the Old Testament, it seemed like everyone was quite obsessed with idols are very bad. Don't have idols. It's kind of one of the first commandments. It seems like God is very obsessed with this idea as well. Don't have other gods in front of before me. And that developed into idols. It's interesting that the laws are some of the very oldest texts written, and where they were still developing their idea of who is God, what is God. And it's interesting that the first commandment is not, there are no other gods except me. Because most of them still believe there are many gods. And Yahweh is our God, and they've got another God. And so God's command is, have no other gods before me. I'm your God. I'm first. But the idea of idols then developed very strongly. Now, today we think, what does idols have to do with us? We no longer worship stumps or whatever. But I want to show you how it's very relevant. What is an idol? Let's think even beyond the Bible, before the Jewish nation was even there. I love going to places of human origins. We just were in Mossel Bay at a place called the Point of Origin, where they found the oldest human-like community remains in that cave. And we've been to some other places where you start seeing consciousness emerging. I think the oldest art we found is about 40,000 years ago. It seems like symbolic thought, art, music, all these things explode within the human species. And they've got to express themselves. And one of the things that happens here is that, and how idols develop from that, is people realize that there is something more about existence than what our eyes communicate. There's something more than just what I can feel. There's some relational movement, and some of them, I believe, had genuine, beautiful encounters with God. Now, God didn't wait somewhere else until we wrote the Bible before he said, okay, now I'll go and encounter people. God's been encountering people in relationship with people forever. Before the Bible, before the Jewish nations, before humans, God was in relationship with creation. Okay? He's not, so I say, he's not that concerned about acknowledgement or getting it right. He just wants relationship. And so idols, I think, is this first attempt in which people want to make this invisible quality that they sense is there. They want to make the invisible visible. And so they begin to carve, they begin to project this experience, this feeling. They want to capture it. And what makes the idol is not the craftsmanship, but it's the gaze of the beholder. Somehow they now have an object on which they can project and settle their gaze and say, this defines this invisible realm, this experience that I had that's beyond just the ordinary. And so before idols, as I said, it's almost like everything was translucent. We saw through it and said, this is not it. This is not it. There's more. But in the idol, suddenly our gaze settles and we say, this has captured that vision. Now, why is that being challenged? Because even when, remember when Moses asks God, what's your name? And God answers YHVH, which we've translated into a name. We say Yahweh. But actually, and we've translated it, I am that I am. But the Hebrew scholars will tell you that the more accurate way of translating that text is, I will be what I will be. You see, a name is a way of taking hold of defining, of locating, of identifying what we're dealing with. And when Moses said, identify yourself, give us your name, God does not give Moses his name. God actually tells him, I don't have a name. You're not going to pin me down. I will be who I will be. Now today, we no longer carve idols as often. We no longer do that. But we do project our gaze, our thoughts, our concepts, our ideas onto God. We give it a form we give it a structure, we give it a name, and we make another idol.
Yeah.
Because it's simply a place where our gaze can settle, where our ideas can be projected.
Yeah.
And so the early Christians had quite a discussion with the Jews because they only have one word for idol. They don't have the word icon. That's the second thing I want to introduce to you, the word icon. So in Afrikaans is dit beeld of afbeeld. Afbeeld is the idol. Now, but the Hebrews didn't have two words for it. They just had one word, and it meant image. And they were basically vehemently against the idea that you are making the invisible visible. Don't make the invisible visible. Because it seems as humans, when we start making sense of the contrasts in our world, we seem to divide the contrasts into two camps, two categories. There's the finite and the infinite. There's the temporal and the eternal. Those are the big contrasts. And somehow we decided that the infinite, the eternal, all those things that we're not quite so aware that we are part of, we ascribe those qualities to God. God is eternal, God is infinite, but God is spirit and flesh. That's another kind of separation. God is mind, and this is matter. God is word, and this is flesh, etc. And we ascribed all the certain qualities to God. He is infinite, He is eternal, He is spirit. But we are temporal, we are finite, we are etc. And this is what made the revelation of Jesus revolutionary, to the extent that we are still trying to get to grips with it today. Most are still trying to grapple because we need a new way of thinking to understand that in Jesus what people encountered is that the eternal is temporal. The Word has become flesh. The Spirit is tangible. The infinite includes the finite. So he starts to redefine God, that God's infinity is not excluding what is finite, but includes it. God's eternity does not exclude what is temporal, but God is temporal as well. Now, these ideas we'll have to explore sometimes. Kind of one of the things it means is there's an aspect of God. If it's temporal, it means it changes. And I think most of you have heard the idea that God doesn't change. Have you heard that? Okay. It's quite fundamental for many Christians. So this idea that God can be in relationship, and relationship is not one way. It means I affect you, but also you affect me. That means it changes something about me. To have a thought is a movement. If you think God is capable of thought, you are thinking logically that God can change. God is in relationship. That's relationship affecting. Yes, then God changes. And so this idea that, yes, there are aspects of God. God is always good. God is always love. There's things that we can say are consistent. The Hebrew way of expressing that is God is faithful. Now, maybe I must also throw this in the mix because as Christians in this century, most of the ideas that we have about our world, our worldview, our Christianity has been influenced by Hellenistic Greek, a specific interpretation of those philosophies that the early church fathers used to interpret text, which is good to do. They try to be relevant to their world. But the Hebrew believers before then didn't have those ideas. So let me give you one example. Let's take changelessness and perfection. So Plato's idea of perfection is it's the highest state beyond which there is no higher level to go. And therefore, if you change it in any way, it is less than perfection. That's his idea of perfection. The Hebrew idea of perfection was much more dynamic. They would think of perfection or more like the highest number. What is the highest number? Add one and it's still higher. Add another one and it's still higher. In other words, perfection is not a state.
Sure.
It's a movement that continually grows. They would look at a flower budding. Well, this is the example I thought of many years ago when I kind of struggled with these ideas. When the flower just begins to open, it is perfect right there for where it should be.
Yes.
But it's still changing. So the Hebrew idea of God was not of a changeless God. Did you know that?
Sure.
In fact, the Hebrew idea of God was, he was constantly changing. He was coming and saying, hey, let's make a deal. If you do this, I'll do that. If you, there's one stage in Jeremiah where, just to give you an example, that God is not static in his knowledge. Do you think there's things that surprise God? The Hebrews thought they are. There's one stage in Jeremiah where he comes and he said, you know, I thought that if I would do this, this and that, you would turn back to me. But I was wrong, you didn't. There's another stage where the Israelites are busy with it and God speaks through the prophet and he said, what the heck are you doing? This has never even occurred to me. You know that there's things that humans do that hasn't even occurred to God. According to that text. So our idea of this perfection that is static, God is complete, perfect in knowledge, it's static. Well, those are some of the remnants of the Hellenistic philosophy that was introduced into Christianity. I want to delve into that, but I need to finish the idol and the icon thought first. So we'll see if we get there. So the idol, we project our gaze, we project our ideas, we have something fixed, we have defined it. Here Jesus appears and he breaks all our categories. The word and flesh are no longer two different things. They're one. The infinite and the finite, the material and mind is no longer two separate things. In fact, your body is mind captured. It is mind written down. Every cell in your body is just information that has been captured. If you look at the tree stump, let's say a fossilized tree stump, that tree stump tells a story. You can go look at the rings and you can say that was a hard year. It grew very slowly. That was an abundant year. Oh, that year had fire. The whole tree stump is a story. It's a narrative that's been written in a language of tree.
Yeah.
Narrative capacity is present in all reality. When you look at bees and flowers, it tells a story of millions of years of cooperation, of relationship, of working out what works for you, what works for me. Let's get together and do something beautiful. And there's flowers, and there's bees, and there's insects, and it's a story. It's a narrative that has been written down in the very form of what makes a bee, the flower a flower. Everything is narrative. Everything is word, and what is physical is simply a written language that we're still trying to decipher and decode, but it's language. And so here Jesus comes and he breaks down all these categories. And so the first Christians start saying that he made something about the invisible God visible. And the Jewish brothers said, that's an idol. And they said, no, we've got to think of how to define it differently. Because yes, we're with you. We shouldn't just make idols where we project our ideas. And so a new word came into being, this word icon. And we read this in Colossians 1:15. Jesus is the icon. So the Greek word, it's the visible representation of the invisible God. So if you think of icons and idols, think of it as two different ways of seeing the invisible. The idol is where I project my gaze, and my gaze is satisfied. My desires is fulfilled because I've projected all my hopes and all my dreams onto this image that I've created. The icon is different because it introduces another gaze. 2 Corinthians 3:18 says, we behold him. And suddenly what we see is not simply what we desire, but we see another gaze more intently focused on us. And we are no longer mesmerized by our ideas of who and what God should be, but we are mesmerized by one who sees in us more than what we've ever seen in ourselves.
Yeah, come on.
One who does not only fulfill desire, but transforms our desire by giving us more than what we are capable of receiving. And by giving us more than we are capable of receiving, by being open to this God of possibilities, rather than being closed by the dogmatic certainty of our religion, by being open to this God of possibility, something is pouring in us like water into a balloon, or maybe it's more like the inflation of our universe. Something's happening that says, I want to help you lose yourself. I want to help you do one of the most exciting things you'll ever do in your life, and that is die. This is what Jesus said, hey, if you want to follow me, you've got to learn how to die daily. Now, when I was in church, that was a very hard message. Basically it meant everything you are is so rotten, the best thing you can do is die. Everything you are is so deprived, if you like it, it's probably sin. If you want it, it's probably your sinful nature. If you enjoy it, it's definitely the devil. So all you need to do is die. That's kind of but I've come to appreciate Jesus' words in a whole new way. Basically, what he's saying is the story that has brought you to this place, the story that has formed this self that you think you know, is too small for the story and the meaning and the value I see unfolding in your life.
Yeah.
And the only way in which you're going to step into the broadness of who you are is by letting go of that small little shell. Letting go of that form that you've become so accustomed to. And open yourself up to the largeness of a God who has no other body except you.
Come on.
A God whose ambition it has always been to find flesh, find existence in you. You see, this is the beauty of the word becoming flesh. If I stand here and if my mind has the idea saying, you know what, a sip of a bit of juice would be quite good now. That's a thought that by itself does not create anything or bring any satisfaction. There's an isolation to mind by itself. For there to be a culmination of creative action and satisfaction, there needs to be a body that says, oh, I like that idea, let's act on it. And both the mind and the body is satisfied because there's a cooperation.
Yeah, beautiful. Oh, come on.
So John says when we think of God, we can think of God as a mind-like structure, a logos, that by himself would be utterly frustrated.
Sure.
And limited.
Yeah.
That this mind-like quality, what this God does is he evaluates what is valuable, what is meaningful, and let's make these dreams of beauty and value and meaning reality by cooperating with my body, with flesh, who says, yes, we think that's a good idea as well. And when mind and flesh comes together, there's a satisfaction, not only for us, but for God.
Wow.
Sure.
See, God doesn't know you because he observes you from a distance. You don't know your body because you stand a part of it and kind of watch what it's doing.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know your body
Sure.
because you experience what it experiences from moment to moment. God is so excited about your life because your life experience enriches him. There's something about your unique place in this world, the relationships that you have that no one else has. It was Descartes who kind of tried to define the human as just a separate psyche, and he's the one that said, I think, therefore I am. There's another philosopher, Jean-Luc Marion, that went and examined that whole premise, and his conclusion was this: actually, it's not your thoughts that makes you you. In fact, somebody else can think your thoughts. And his conclusion is this. He said, I love, therefore I am. Because no one else is in the relationships that you are in. And that is what makes you unique. No one else has those relationships. And that's why you are a unique part of God. How can I say it differently? God didn't just make you. You are made of God. There's a part of you that is, there's a part of you that's God. Let me say it a different way. There's a part of God that's you. And without you, God would be less than what He is in this moment. Now, we can explore that thought deeper and deeper, but I guess the impression that I want to leave you with is, when we talk about God, we're not talking about some entity out there, some separate personality, but we are talking about the very possibility within this moment of greater love, of greater meaning, of greater beauty in this world. We're talking about the God that is the very essence of every molecule that decides what possibilities to realize in its next moment. It's a God who is intertwined with all existence. It's a word that's become flesh. And so we're not talking about the separate God. So what this means is you are of incredible value. Hope you get that point. And I don't know, we might go into it further when we discuss it, but it also means that let me finish the idols and icons. I'm going to finish. So Colossians 1:15 says, Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the icon. Do you know the little icon on your computer?
Yes.
It's just a representation of something that is much larger beyond it.
That's right. Yes.
So the icon is not it.
Yes.
The icon is the doorway
Yes.
to the it. That can do things that the icon can't.
Yeah.
So we've often read that verse and we said, everything that the invisible God is became visible in Jesus. I think if we interpret it that way, we are in the process of creating another idol, where we've defined, we've captured, and there's nothing that remains invisible. I think a better way of interpreting that is to say, God remains the invisible God. And Jesus remains the one who gives us an invitation, an entrance into this mystery that we will never exhaust. It's like being given a torchlight and thrown into the Atlantic Ocean. It says, go have fun, explore. You're gonna, by the time you get to one end, you've forgotten what you've seen in the beginning, and you've got to see it from a different angle. It's vast beyond imagination.
Oh.
So the icon, what is different about the icon is our gaze. It's not just a projection of our own gaze. It's not just the fulfillment of our own desires. It's a gaze that draws us beyond our own gaze. Now, there's a time when you look into somebody's eyes. When I met Marianne first time and our eyes met, I was first amazed by what I saw. But then what amazed me even more is when I realized she saw me.
Come on.
Yes.
And I realized that she sees something in me that I did not even see myself. That is the experience of falling in love. And so the icon is this encounter with God where, yes, something of God becomes visible. It's a way of seeing, but it's a visibility that invites us into something deeper, into those aspects of God that are still invisible, into that experience of God that is never exhausted, that never comes to a place of dogmatic certainty, but always remains at that place of wonder and awe and excitement of these ways in which this experience can evolve and develop. So that's the difference between those two. So I actually had 6 points. I got through the first. So I'm gonna leave it there at the first and say, let's have a drink before we engage in conversation. Or maybe, Marianne, do you want to do a song to kind of settle this one, and then you'll have a drink and then you'll come back for conversation. Do you want to do it any other way? So? Okay, so let's have a drink first and then we'll start with a song after.